Shalom everyone, my name is Jacqueline Luz and I would like to welcome you all to a new video in our channel, Youth Pilgrims. So for today's video, it is a translated and summarized version of a Spanish video, La Parábola del Sembrador siendo tierra buena, which is an input given by Brother Sebastian. And the title for the video for today is in English, The Parable of the Sower being good soil. Today's video will learn how to be the good soil and what kind of soil we are not supposed to be. And this parable can be found in Mark 4, verses 3 to 8. And it says, "Listen, behold, a sower went out to spread some seed. It happened that as he sowed, some fell beside the road, and the birds came and ate it up. Other seed fell on rocky ground, where it didn't have much soil. It sprang up immediately, because the soil wasn't deep. But when the sun came up, it was scorched, and because it had no root, it withered away. Other seed fell among the thorns, and the thorns grew and choked it, and it yielded no crop. And others fell into the good soil and were producing fruit, springing up and increasing. They yielded a crop, producing 30, 60, and 100-fold. So before we begin learning about the type of soil we need to be, we will learn the three components of this parable that are very important in our life. The first component is the sower, which is Yeshua. He was sent by the Father to sow that seed in us, and it's only through him that we can 1. Receive the seed, 2. Receive those nutrients in the correct manner, and 3. Grow and give fruits. As we know, he is the living word, or the verb, of the Father. Therefore, if he is the word, and in the word is the truth, because it is everything said by the Eternal, then Yeshua is the truth. He is also the Reshit, the first of the first. He is the first emanated from the Father, the first that came to give the true interpretation of the Scriptures, and he was the first to live his life based on everything that the Father ordained. This is why he is the only perfect example we have to follow. He is also the cornerstone where we base ourselves. If we are his disciples and follow him, then we learn how to serve the Father in the correct way. And he is also the intermediary, the sower sent by the Father to sow that seed. And without him, then we wouldn't have that seed. And the second component is the seed, which is the word. If Yeshua is the verb, and if the verb is the truth, then here we know that the word is the truth, because it was given by the Eternal so that we could guide ourselves with it. It is a guide that helps us comply with the instruction and the Father's purpose. And it is also a prophecy. The Eternal lets us see aspects that were first fulfilled in the past. For example, in the Scriptures we see what happened with the people of Israel, and we see that the Father ordained them to build a Mishkan, which is a temple. Back then, they may not have understood why, but today we can understand what the Eternal wanted to see and show, which is 1, that he has a plan for us, and 2, that's why he gave us Yeshua, that only through him are we able to complete that plan, but that it also depends on us to wash our garments in order to have access to the tree of life. And second, going back to how it's a prophecy, we also see what has yet to be fulfilled. And these help us to be prepared. It's like a guide for us to know what is to come and how we have to be prepared for it, so that we can be like those 5 virgins that had oil on their lamps and were ready for when the husband came. The word is also a guide. In it comes the instruction and more that teach us and help us live a life based on what the Eternal gives us. And finally, the word is instruction that we need in order to comply with the purpose of the Father and also help others around us to complete that purpose. And this is something important we need to have in mind. Not only are we learning for ourselves, but we're also learning for others around us. So anything we do doesn't only affect us, but them as well. And the third component we see is the soil, which represents mankind. In Strong's Dictionary, Hebrews 120, the word soil, or the word mankind, comes from Adam, which means a human being. And this word derives from Hebrews 127, Adamah, which means soil. As the soil, we are also an important part of the plan, but not the most important part, that the Father has for salvation. So that the seed can be sowed, there needs to be soil. And in order to get this plan across, we need to know what condition we have to be in so that we can work in the correct way. We need to learn how to be that good and fertile soil. So now that we understand these three components of that parable, we will begin to degloss the parable, which teaches us how to be good soil and what is the type of soil that we need to avoid. So the first type of soil can be found in verse 4. The first seed fell on the road, and it fell far from the soil where it was supposed to fall in order to receive the nutrients it needs to grow. So how do we apply this to ourselves? In order to understand each soil better, we will be deglossing them part by part. And the first part or component we see of this soil is that it was a soil on the road. If we're that soil that is on the road, then we're not the good soil with the nutrients needed for that seed to grow, meaning that we're distant or far from the instruction or the scriptures, and we're far from the practice of them. This type of soil are usually people that know about or do know the instruction, maybe people that believe in something like God, how they call him, but they don't comply with the instruction, and they don't put it in action. They may believe, but they don't act on it. And this is how they become that soil that's on the road. They believe or know, but they don't act on it. And then finally, the bird comes and takes away the seed. And now we move into the next component, which are birds. And this can be the adversary Satan, since he generates deception, the deception of not falling on good soil. But although Satan is usually referred to as the adversary, it's not always him. We can be our own adversary or our own deceivers with our own flesh. Many times, we are the ones who dispose ourselves of that seed, of that instruction, because it may not benefit us, and we may not like it, or we may have other interests. And this takes us to the next concept, which are the roots. This seed did not even grow any roots, since it was taken away. And we see this in those who listen without interest, who don't care about the scriptures. Maybe they know and believe in something. They may know that there's a Bible or a supreme being, that there's good and evil, but they don't care. And when there's no interest, then there's no roots. Roots help plants get the nutrients they need. But if the plant has no roots, then it won't matter the amount of leaves it has, nor how thick the stem is. They simply won't be able to get the nutrients they need, and they'll die. The roots, or interest, help us accept all of the knowledge and instruction that our Father is giving us. And why is this interest important? It's important because it shows that we truly want to have that instruction in our life. And when we mention interest, this doesn't mean a short-term interest, but we mean one that lasts our whole life, that's lasting in our whole pilgrimage. And then we move on to the next part, which is far from the soil. This is an incredulous person, someone who does not believe, because they are far from the rich soil with the nutrients needed for that seed to grow. Hence, they are far from the instruction, the Torah, and teachings of Yeshua, needed for the scriptures to grow in their mind and heart. Now, what does it mean to believe? It is not just knowing He, the one and only Elohim, exists, and knowing Him in general. These are two different concepts. But it also means that because we know He exists, and because we know Him, we want to put His instruction in action in our life. This is how we get to that good soil, and we avoid being on the road, where we are exposed to fall in incredulity, not have roots, and get eaten by the birds. The next kind of soil can be found on verses 5 to 6. The first concept of this is a lack of deep soil. This represents the lack of effort, and these are those who want to know, and that know, that believe, and look to come near the good soil, these are people that begin to put in action, but this action is not necessary, or they're giving the indispensable, and they only give what is needed in order to say, yes, I am here. For example, these are people that may say, yes, I read the Bible, yes, I commemorate the biblical festivities, but digging deeper into the scriptures, that's not for me. Or we have another example where they say, or they could say, yes, I don't eat pork, nor do I listen to pagan music, but commemorating the Father's festivities, that's not for me. Now, this is the small or lack of effort represented by the lack of deep soil. All our pilgrimage requires effort, meaning that as real believers, our soil should be deep. When there is no effort, then we become someone who wants to walk but doesn't try their hardest to do so, and they just get stuck where they are at, unable to proceed. And this is what it means when it says, didn't have much soil. Maybe they have roots, but it will not grow because it was not able to reach depth, where they would be able to root themselves completely and get the nutrients they need. And we go into the next concept, which is that the seed or the plant sprang up immediately. And these are people who are full of emotions, that are excited and very active. But after a short period of time, they lose that excitedness for the scriptures, for learning, for changing, and applying that change in a life. Emotions can make people act on impulse, even before they understand anything or they think about it. And many of those who call themselves believers, who first learn about the word and repent, and they cry and state they are a new creature, are led by such emotions. And this is something that can be commonly seen in religions, and this is actually something that I also experienced myself. They don't understand the responsibility it takes as well as commitment. And it doesn't mean commitment to attend church or attend different church events and become best of the best. But this commitment means we study and go in depth with the scriptures every day because we are the temple and the Holy Spirit lives in us. And Yeshua, as the sower, has come and planted the seed in our lives. Therefore, it is now our responsibility to make an effort every day to study, to learn, to reflect, to apply, and to change, washing our garments as we walk on the path of truth and life. And this is not an emotional pilgrimage, but this is a path filled with understanding and obedience. And then we go into the next concept, which is the sun came and scorched him. Now here the sun represents the adversities and afflictions. It burned because it had little to no root. It wasn't held on tightly, and it didn't have any effort in order to be able to hold on in the correct manner. Plants need the sun, and in that same way, we also need the sun. The seed we have in our soil needs it to grow, and in that same way, we need the afflictions and adversities in our life in order to die to ourselves, die to our flesh, and become stronger in our Father. If we're soil where the seed falls on rocks and it grows fast, but there are no roots, then when the sun comes, the plant will wither. Meaning, if afflictions come, but our roots are not deep, that sun will not help us. Instead, there will be trials that would be much too hard for us to get through. And the scriptures teach us that such afflictions are, in fact, for our own benefit, since they help us understand what the will of our Father is in our life. And then going on to the next part, it burned because its roots were not deep. And this ties back to the concept of emotionalism. When people are led by their emotional impulse, they do not have any deep roots. This can be seen often in youth who act without knowledge, without wisdom, and without true belief. For this reason, once the afflictions come, they are burned quickly. And emotionalism demonstrates itself when people act in one way in front of others. For example, calling for attention or wanting to be noticed. It is all superficial. And this demonstrates their lack of roots as well as the lack of depth. This is someone who lacks the nutrients necessary, and when the sun comes, they burn. And where do our nutrients come from that nourish and fortify us? Well, they come from the scriptures. The Creator's teachings through Moshe, his prophets, and his one and only emanated Son. Yeshua teaches us that our connection and our communion with the Father isn't public, isn't something that we have to demonstrate to the whole world or prove to the whole world. And it isn't something that has to be known by the world. But instead, this communion is private, and it's a personal connection we have with the Father. In Matthew 6, verses 5 to 6, it says, "When you pray, or when you have this communion, do not be like the hypocrites, for they love to pray standing in the synagogues and on the street corners, so that they may be seen by others. Amen, I tell you, they have their reward in full. But you, when you pray, go into your inner room, and when you have shut your door, pray to your Father who is in secret, and your Father, who sees in secret, shall reward you." That rocky soil, because of its lack of effort, and as it is exposed to afflictions and adversities, and because of its emotionalism and not having roots, the seed and plant end up scorched and withered. And it is a soil that does not work for the Father's purpose, to become disciples of Mashiach, disciple others, and rectify our path every day so that we can receive the promise of salvation in order to be saved from when the Mashiach comes again for judgment. Now the next type of soil can be found on verse 7, and here we see the concept of thorns. Yeshua explains later on that these are the passions and cares of the world, which can be represented with materialism, earthly wishes, vain thoughts, and many other things. These are passions and cares that corrupt our walk, our pilgrimage, and that corrupt our growth. Here the seed does germinate, and it starts growing, much different to the other ones that we saw previously, where the first seed was taken by the birds, and the second seed grew fast, but withered. Here, this seed is possibly growing and growing, until finally the thorns grow to the point where they choke it. Now these are thorns that, in a very subtle way, are also choking us. When we're growing, we may believe that we're growing at a good pace, spiritually, that we're being strengthened, and that the fruits we are producing are good ones. But by the time we realize that we have these thorns in our life, we are already choking. And the problem with passions is that they can become an eagerness of something that we don't want to leave, because we are in that stubborn phase of not wanting to leave it. But there's also the eagerness of wanting to act, because we understand that in order to grow, we need to continue walking in our pilgrimage. Otherwise, we run the risk of getting stuck where we're at. Hence, passions and cares, or eagerness, does not just mean we stop doing things, but it also means we start acting and moving, taking steps forward in our spiritual growth. And what we also see here is being lukewarm. This soil that has thorns, but at the same time has the seed, which is someone who has a foot in the passions and cares in the world, but also has a foot in the scriptures. And this is seen as incongruency, given that maybe in one situation they act a certain way according to their own flesh or own thoughts, and in the other situation they act or try to act according to what they know about the scriptures. But in Revelations, we see what will happen to those who act this way. Chapter 3, verse 16. "So because you are lukewarm and neither cold or hot, I am about to spew you out of my mouth." And then from here we progress to the next concept, which is that it does not give fruits. And this ties back into the last point of being incongruent. These are people who may appear to be very active, who may appear to be very studious, or who may seem to believe, but the fruits they produce are not good, or they are simply not giving any fruits at all, regardless of their so-called effort. Not only do these people hurt themselves, but they also hurt others around them. Because a true believer will look to help those who show interest in the scriptures and who yearn to return to the Father. But those who are not producing real fruits and who are not producing fruits at all are not only deviating themselves from the path, but they're also deviating others from returning to the Father. In Matthew 23, verses 27 to 28, we see that Yeshua says, "Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you are like the whitewashed tombs, which look beautiful on the outside, but inside are full of dead men's bones and everything unclean. In the same way, you appear righteous to men on the outside, but are full of hypocrisy and lawlessness." We need to be congruent. This way, we'll be able to measure if we are truly growing or not, and if we're doing it in the correct way established by the Father. If we are producing good fruits, then it means that we are growing in the correct way. And it is important to know that when we produce fruits, it is at its time, but it doesn't mean that we stop caring or that we stop being attentive to the fruits we give. On the contrary, it means that we check and see if we're producing fruits and what kind. And this way, we'll be able to guide ourselves and know if we're serving and growing in the correct way in accordance to what the Father has instructed. And what are the fruits? Fruits are the ones we produce with the Ruach, and they are produced based on the instruction we receive. These are fruits that can be seen in our lives. When we begin to die to our flesh, when we die to ourselves, when we help others around us based on what's established by the Eternal, when we fulfill the instructions, and when we see ourselves separate and walk away from all that can make us fall. These are good and true or real fruits. And we also have a video in our channel that touches more about this topic of the fruits given by the Ruach, as well as the fruits given by the flesh. If you haven't watched it, then I recommend you to do so. And now, in verse 8, the last verse, we will begin to see and study and analyze what it means to be a good soil, or what type of soil we are supposed to be. The past three soils are the ones that we are not supposed to be. 1, we're not supposed to be the path, where the seed falls but is quickly taken away by the birds. 2, we're not supposed to be the rocky soil, where the seed falls and springs quickly, only to scorch and wither away as soon as the sun appears. And 3, we're not supposed to be that soil where there are thorns, since they will choke the plant and die. What is being good soil? When there is good soil, there are fruits. And these are results that have to do with what we see in the scriptures. If we are producing correct fruits, then we are able to corroborate them with the scriptures. And the fruits produced based on the instruction are not ones that can be measured with earthly things, but these are ones that can be measured in a celestial manner. Next, we see that this seed springs, and there's a growth. If a seed falls on good soil, but it does not grow, then this soil does not work at all. There has to be a noticeable growth in our lives, one that is and can be seen. Maybe in our pilgrimage, we don't grow super fast, but this is a process, and it's a process where our growth should be noticeable day by day. Each day, we have to get better and better, and this way, we'll be able to see if we're truly growing as believers and as disciples and as children of the one and only Elohim. Next, we see that with this soil, it produces fruits. Not only does the seed or the plant grow, but it also has to produce fruits. If the plant merely grows, but it does not produce fruits, then it doesn't work. Being good soil means we acknowledge that it's not by our merits and hard work, but it is through Yeshua, the sower, who places that seed, and is making sure that seed has water, which is ruach, and the nutrients, which are the instructions, necessary to grow and produce fruits. In Matthew 3:10 it says, "Already the axe is laid at the root of the trees. Therefore, every tree that does not produce good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire." So why is it important for us to bear fruits? Because any tree or any plant that does not bear good fruits, or any fruits in general, will get cut off. Meaning that instead of receiving the promise of eternal life, we will be punished to eternal death. And for this reason, we have to persevere and always make an effort every day to bear true fruits with the Ruach of the Father as we grow. And then this takes us into the next concept, which are the roots that we see here in this verse. When we have roots, we are receiving nutrients. So where are our roots connected? Or where should our roots be connected? In John 15 verse 5, it says, "I am the vine, you are the branches. The one who abides in me, and I in him, bears much fruit. For apart from me, you can't do nothing." If we are not connected to Yeshua, who is the vine, then we won't be able to receive the nutrients necessary to survive. He is a path of truth and life to reach the Father. He is the living Word, and he has the Father's instructions, hence why he is the living Word. He came to be a perfect example for us to follow, to live a life subjected to the Creator Elohim, following and complying to his Father's instructions. If our roots are not connected to him, then we don't receive the Father's instructions as we should, and we are instead cut off from the vine. And then from here, we move on to the concept where it's producing fruits 30, 60, and 100-fold. The seed that fell on good soil produced different fruits. And we can understand this by also analyzing and comparing the parable of the talents in Matthew 25 verses 14 to 30. We see that these three servants each receive a certain amount of talents from their master. The first servant, who had 5 talents, got 5 more after working hard. The second servant, who had received 2, got 2 more, and the last one, who received 1, stayed with the same amount, since they did not work it. This parable also connects to the parable of the sower, given that both talk about fruits. The first type of fruit, the 100-fold, can be seen when the first servant, who received 5 bags at first, worked them and made 5 more. A servant that worked hard to give back 100% of what was given to him. And the second type of fruit produced, the 60, can be seen with the second servant, who received 2 bags and made 2 more. This servant also worked hard to give them back at least 60% of what was given to him. And lastly, we see the third type of fruit produce, which is a 30, which can be seen with the third servant, who received 1 bag, dug a hole to bury it, and chose not to work it, therefore only producing 30% and giving back to his master the same amount of talents he left with him. We shouldn't fall in the condition of the last servant, who did not want to produce more talents out of laziness and wickedness, and only return the talents his master gave to him. We should instead strive to be like the other 2, and even more like the first one, who produced 100-fold. This should be our goal. And although at first we may not be able to produce all these fruits like the first one, we should do our best so that each day we can continue to produce even more, until we finally reach the first one. And this, in fact, is the example we receive from Mashiach. He is the only perfect one who fulfilled the Father's laws, the only one without sin, and we should strive to reach that level of perfection that our Mashiach has left us as an example. And maybe we may not reach that level of totality, but that does not mean we quit. Instead, it means that we should strive to at least reach the level of a second servant who was still considered faithful in a few things and was placed in charge of many things. But we should not fall to the level of the third servant, whose gold was taken away from and given to the first servant. Finally, being good soil means we don't fall in these adverse conditions that will not let us grow, that will leave us stuck and lead us to death and become infertile. We should be instead that good and correct soil that has the necessary nutrients, that recognizes who its sower is, and that it receives the nutrients and seed from the sower, that germinates and sprouts and grows and produces, and that is generating and producing fruits and will continue to produce fruits in the correct way, that doesn't consolidate itself with the minimum, but instead thrives and makes the effort to produce more. In this way, we'll be able to continue growing. And not only will we be that good soil, but we'll also get to be that soil that produces 100-fold. Well, thank you everyone for watching this video. We ask that you could please give us a thumbs up as well as share the video. And any questions, comments, or topic requests that you may have can be written in the comment section down below. Thank you very much. Blessings and shalom.